Hey, welcome back to Jonny Builds, where this week I built two of these simple modern plywood chairs out of one sheet of plywood, and I did it all for the Modern Maker Podcast Rockler Plywood Challenge. Let's see how I did it. This project starts with a single sheet of 4 foot by 8 foot, 3/4 inch Baltic Birch Plywood. Each one of these chairs is made from a half sheet of plywood, so I started by marking out and breaking down the sheet of plywood in half with my track saw. Next, I set my table saw fence to 5 inches and ripped 4 of these 5-inch wide strips, and these will serve as the back legs and uprights of the chair. And since I'm making 2 chairs, I ripped 4 of these strips from each one of the half sheets of plywood. Here you see me using 2 scraps of plywood to set the fence on the table saw and ripping down the rest of each one of the half sheets. Since the plywood is actually a little bit less than 3/4 inches, this is an important step for measuring and marking for the entire rest of the project. You'll see what I mean as we go along. And when it's all done, you'll end up with 34 of these 1.5 inch strips. And moving on to the back leg uprights, I measured them at 32 inches, set up a stop block, and then cut them over on the miter saw. The offcuts from the back legs get ripped down in half and become the seat back horizontal stretchers. All of the 1.5 inch strips get cut down to 17 inches, and for each chair you need 33 of these pieces. Then I could organize and lay out all the pieces that I would need for each chair, starting with 21 of these strips that get laminated together to make up the seat bottom. Next, I glued up all the strips for the seat, and I really tried to keep these as flat as possible to save time for sanding later. Next, I glued up 6 pairs of these 1.5 inch pieces for each chair to become the lower stretchers and front legs. I also glued up pairs of the 5-inch wide pieces that become the back legs. You need 2 for each chair. I made a template on some 1/2 inch MDF, and to mark out the angles, I just used this cheap protractor. The back legs splay inward at 6 degrees. I marked out a 26-inch line at this 6-degree angle and then used one of the laminated pairs of 1.5 inch strips to set the thickness. The backrest gets marked out at 6 inches long and it splays backwards at 7 degrees. I used my bandsaw to cut out the leg template. Then I transferred the template onto each one of the 4 leg blanks. I cut out the legs in the bandsaw, making sure to cut outside of the lines that I had marked. I attached the template to the legs I cut out with some double-sided tape. And pro tip, don't use this much tape. This was really hard to get off. This is a 1.5 inch flush trim bit, and that top bearing rides against the template and trims the leg blank to match the template exactly. Then I hit all the legs with some 120 grit sandpaper to clean any marks left by the router bit. After squaring up the front of the seat, I set the saw blade to 6 degrees, and this will allow the back of the seat to match that 6-degree angle of the legs. Each one of the seats gets cut to 16 inches, and this is measured from where the seat is at its longest. This is a good time to sand the seats up to 120 grit, and it's also a good time for you to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the projects I've got coming up. I measured 15.5 inches up on the back legs, which marks out where the bottom of the seat will go. The lower stretchers sit 1.5 inches below the seat, and I marked out their locations as well. Because of the angle, I couldn't use dominoes to attach the backs of the seats and the stretchers, so I made this drilling template with 3/8 inch holes to drive in screws later. I drilled a few pilot holes and attached the back legs to the seats with 2.5 inch screws. To make the front legs, I used one of the laminated 17-inch long pieces and then cut it down to 15 inches on the crosscut sled. The front legs get attached to the seat with dominoes, and here you see me marking out alignment lines for that. Again, you don't need a domino to build these chairs. You could use screws, plug them with dowels like I did on the back of the seats. It's just what I have and what works easiest for me. I set my saw blade to 7 degrees and then cut bevels in the upper stretchers to match the angle of the backrest. All the horizontal stretchers, except for the side stretchers, get cut down to 12 inches wide. I marked out the locations for the dominoes on the upper stretchers and then transfer these marks over to the backrest where they will attach. I measured 5.5 inches up from the bottom of the legs and cut in dominoes for the lower stretchers. I then did a dry assembly of the chair using all the stretchers that I had cut so far. There we go. Now on the side stretchers, there's a 6-degree angle in the back and then it butts up to that 90-degree angle in the front. So you have to measure these out and cut them to fit. I made small passes on the table saw in order to get that perfect fit, which ended up being 14 7/8 inch at its longest point. Here I'm laying out the location of that front stretcher, which again is 1.5 inches below the bottom of the seat. I drilled in a few pilot holes for the side stretchers and then attached them with screws, but then I had to unattach everything, take it all apart to sand everything up and get it ready for final assembly. I started putting this chair together by attaching the front stretcher to the legs, and then I could attach the 2 side stretchers as well. The rest of the assembly is just like you saw me do in the dry fit, only this time I'm adding glue. And for the last bit of assembly, I'm using these 3/8 inch oak dowels to plug up all the screw holes. And finally, I can move on to finishing. I used a clear matte polyacrylic, applied 3 coats, and these chairs were all finished. Hey everybody, thanks for watching, and thanks to the guys over at the Modern Maker Podcast, Mike, Ben, and Chris, for putting on this 1 sheet of plywood challenge. Now, a couple months ago, I drew up the design for this very simple yet modern plywood chair, and I was listening to the Modern Maker Podcast, and they were talking about the upcoming challenge, and I got the feeling that it was gonna be a 1 sheet of plywood challenge. So I held off, and man, I'm really glad that I did. So this is now my official entry into the Rockler Plywood Challenge, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I really like working with Baltic Birch. It's one of my favorite materials. If you haven't watched it already, go check out my plywood dining table. There's a link to it up in the corner. And I did the same technique. I laminated multiple layers of Baltic Birch plywood together. And one thing about Baltic Birch, it's just a really nice material to work with. When you laminate it together and you see all the different plies, it looks really good and gives the piece a very unique, sleek, linear look, and I just love the way it looks. I really wanted to show off all the plies in the seat. I tried to limit the veneer face as much as possible, but I think it looks cool, the contrast of having the plies on the front with the veneer face on the side. So let me know what you think about this build in the comments down below. If you liked it, make sure you hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It really helps my channel grow. And a big thank you to everyone that's subscribed already. You can check out behind the scenes stuff on Instagram @JonnyBuilds. So thank you everybody for checking this one out, and we'll see you back here next time.